Alien beastwoman won't let me eat until I accept her as my maid, and she's sitting on the food. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The moment Eric Hayes opened his eyes, he realized he wasn't dead, but he might have preferred it. His shuttle was gone, torn to jagged remains halfway down the cliffside, held in place by a network of thick, root-like vines. His legs ached, ribs throbbed, and the high-altitude air tasted like ozone and moss. Floating platforms extended above a sea of pink clouds, linked by vine bridges that swayed in the breeze. The place looked like a hallucination. Massive tree roots coiled into suspended walkways, huts clinging to branch-thick columns, and beast-like figures gliding overhead with enormous wings. Skyward Haven, they called it in the old records. He'd read about the beastwoman tribes, thought they were long disbanded. Guess not. Eric pushed himself to his feet, jaw clenched. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His emergency rations had been lost during the crash, and the village healers that dragged him here didn't speak much Earth standard. They treated his injuries with cold sap and bark poultices, then left him in an open hut with a view that would make a poet weep, but no food, no explanations, just stares. By the 3rd day, he couldn't wait anymore. He followed the sound of chattering voices and the smell of roasted roots, and meet to a communal platform where dozens of beastwomen sat in a circle, passing bowls, tossing jokes between them in their native tongue. He stepped forward, held his hands up, and forced a polite smile. "I don't want to offend anyone," he said clearly, "slow and careful, but I haven't eaten in 2 days. May I join you?" The voices hushed, every golden eye turned. One figure stood. She was taller than him by a head winged with dusty red fur that glinted like ember coal under the sun. Her golden eyes were sharp, slitted. A long vertical scar ran down her left cheek, framed by braided feathers in her ears. She looked more like a war banner than a woman, and then, without a word, she stepped over the feast, crouched, and sat directly on the large serving platter at the center of the low table. Meat, breadfruit, grain, rolls, all vanished beneath her toned figure and broad wings. Eric blinked. "Excuse me?" The others smirked but stayed silent. The winged woman folded her wings behind her back, locked eyes with him, and spoke in heavily accented Earth standard. "No male eats in my territory unless he is my mate." The words hung like thunder. Eric stared, thinking maybe this was a joke, a tribal prank on the newcomer. Then he saw the expressions some amused others, dead serious. No one offered him a plate, no one moved. She remained exactly where she was, tail flicking once behind her, and her eyes never left his face. Eric cleared his throat. "Look, I get cultural differences, but I'm not here for that. I crashed, remember, emergency situation. My shuttle's well was parked halfway down the ravine. I'm a diplomat, not a contestant on a dating show. I just need some calories, not a courtship ritual." "You live," she said evenly. "Because I let you. You want to eat? You mate me." He laughed, not out of mockery, but disbelief. "You're kidding." She didn't move, didn't blink. "No, I am Alma, wing guard of this platform, all food grown, gathered and prepared here, belongs to my lineage. Eat without my claim, and you insult the rights." He rubbed a hand down his face. Hunger clawed at his gut. His pride told him to walk away, but his instincts knew better. No backup was coming. His calm was destroyed. If the satellite beacon hadn't pinged during the crash, he might be stranded for weeks. He needed energy, needed allies. Picking a fight with the 6-foot winged warrior sitting on his breakfast wouldn't help. Eric took a slow breath and sat down across from her, mirroring the cross-legged posture of the others. "Okay, I'll play along. Let's talk terms. What exactly does mate mean here? You expect a ceremony, some kind of symbolic gesture, or are we talking a binding contract?" The surrounding women chuckled softly. Alma did not. You sleep under my wing, you take no other's name, you share first meal with me each dawn and last meal at dusk, you stand beside me in sky or fire, you are mine, that is the meaning. Eric stared at her, heart thudding. She wasn't joking. There was no irony in her tone, just direct challenge. But behind her golden eyes he saw something else. Maybe curiosity, maybe defiance. This wasn't just about him. This was a test. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice steady. You don't know anything about me. I could be a criminal or a liar. I watched you crawl from burning metal. You cried out no God's name. You stood even when your legs bled. I know enough. And if I say no? She shrugged. Then you do not eat. Eric let out a long, bitter exhale. What if I'm not ready for that kind of commitment over a bowl of roots? Then you are not ready for this tribe. Her words hit harder than expected. He wasn't just hungry. He was humiliated, but she wasn't mocking him. She was dead serious. Alma wasn't trying to play games. In her eyes, in her world, this was law. And by crashing into her skybound domain, he'd fallen under her rule whether he liked it or not. He stood slowly, holding her gaze. Fine. I won't steal from your table. I'll find my own way to survive out here. She didn't stop him as he walked away. But before he turned the corner of the vine bridge, he glanced back and caught her watching him. Not smug, not victorious, just waiting. Eric didn't make it far before the dizziness forced him to stop. The heat up on the sky platforms was unbearable, but the wind drained moisture from his skin, and the pink mist rising from the clouds below seemed to carry some sort of subtle disorientation. The vine bridge beneath his feet swayed with every gust. His stomach was tight with hunger, his hands cold from fatigue, and every movement came with the kind of delayed ache that warned he was running on fumes. Still, he wasn't about to turn back, not to beg, and definitely not to kneel before a woman who used food like a throne. He found a ledge on one of the smaller, less populated platforms, barely more than a woven landing strip for winged travelers, and sat down hard, breathing through his nose. A few winged villagers glanced his way from afar, but didn't approach. Maybe Alma had already marked him as off-limits. Maybe they were just following unspoken rules. Whatever the reason, it left Eric alone with his thoughts, the hollow pit in his belly, and the quiet rustle of wind through the vines. He wasn't mad at her, not really. Frustrated, yes. Confused, absolutely, but she hadn't hurt him. She could have thrown him off the platform when he first arrived, could have refused the medics who stabilized his ribs and patched the burns on his palms. Instead, Alma had made a choice. And, by the looks of it, forced everyone else to accept it. That kind of authority didn't come from strength alone. It came from history and respect. That made her dangerous, but it also made her interesting. Still, interesting didn't solve his calorie problem. Eric pulled himself upright again and decided he'd try to work within the system, at least for now. He wasn't here to spark a cultural incident. He was a damn diplomat. Well, technically a comms liaison, but it was close enough. He knew how to listen, knew how to ask the right questions, and if there was a way to earn a meal without triggering a full-blown tribal engagement, he'd find it. He wandered deeper into the lower areas, where the wind was calmer and the platforms were closer to the massive central tree that anchored the village. There, he found smaller gardens growing in shallow pockets along the bark, where older beast women knelt beside flowering bushes and root beds. He hesitated before approaching, then offered a polite nod and gestured toward the soil. "May I help?" he asked. "Work trade." One of the elders looked up, sharp-eyed and wrinkled, and squinted at him. Then she grunted and jabbed a clawed finger toward an empty patch of dry earth. Without waiting for more direction, Eric dropped to his knees and got to work. The tools were crude, curved stone, sharpened bone, but the soil was rich and the task simple. Dig, plant, pat, water, repeat. It didn't take long before sweat beaded on his brow, and his arms moved on their own, focused purely on motion, not thought. The elder didn't speak to him again for a while. Eventually, she set a gourd of water beside him. No words, just a gesture. He took it, nodded his thanks, and drank slowly, savoring every drop. It wasn't food, but it was enough to keep him upright. By the time the sky shifted from brilliant gold to deep purple, a sign that dusk was nearing, he planted nearly 24 root clusters. His shoulders burned, but his hands felt steady again. As he stood and dusted off his trousers, the elder finally spoke. "You work clean," she said in thickly accented Earth Standard. "No complain, no steal." Eric offered a tired smile. "I'll take that as a compliment." She grunted. "Alma chose you." He hesitated. "She made a proposal I didn't accept." "You will." Eric blinked. "Is that a prediction or a threat?" "Neither. She's strong, you steady, you will match." He shook his head, partly amused. "You people sure about fate, aren't you?" The elder didn't answer. She just turned back to her crops, and Eric took the cue to leave. That evening, he returned to the small hut he had been assigned after the crash. No food awaited him, but someone had left a folded cloth with a salve he didn't recognize. He assumed it was another tribal remedy and rubbed it over his sore forearms. The cooling sensation helped ease the tension. As he leaned against the hut wall and looked out at the stars, he heard a quiet thump behind him, then a heavier one. He turned. Alma stood just outside his door, wings folded tight against her back, arms crossed. Her golden eyes narrowed in the dim light. "You planted my kin's roots," she said plainly. "I planted for food, not for favor." "Same thing," she replied. "You begin to earn." Eric looked down at his hands. "I'm not trying to win anyone over. I just want to survive long enough to get back to my crew." "No one comes," Alma said, stepping closer. "We saw Fire Cloud. No rescue boat. You are alone." Eric bristled. "Then I'll survive alone." "You already failing," she replied without heat. "You starve. You weaken." "So, let me eat," he snapped. "I'll pay. I'll work." "Just stop sitting on the damn food." She stepped even closer until her wings nearly brushed the entryway. "You insult me again. I break your ribs this time." They locked eyes for several beats, neither backing down, and then to his surprise she knelt, not threateningly, but low enough to sit on her heels and place something beside him, a roll of dried fruit, a strip of salted meat, and a single pale root. "I give this once, not because you beg, because you earn," she said. Eric stared at the offering. "So, this is what a truce." "This is not a mating," she clarified with an annoyed flick of her ear feathers. "This is hunger answer. You keep working, I keep feeding, and if I change my mind about the mating..." She stood. "Then you eat more." Without waiting for a reply, Alma turned and leapt off the edge of the platform, wings catching the updraft with a rustle and a snap, leaving Eric sitting there with food in his lap, questions in his head, and for the first time in days, a full breath in his lungs. The food tasted like salvation. Eric didn't gobble it down. He wasn't that far gone, but each bite spread warmth through his limbs, lifting the fog behind his eyes. The salted meat was tough but flavorful, the dried fruit sweet enough to make his jaw ache, and the pale root had a dense, almost buttery texture. He sat cross-legged outside his hut, chewing slowly, letting his body process the gift for what it was. Not charity, not dominance. A trade, a beginning. He didn't trust Alma. Not completely, but that didn't mean he dismissed her. In fact, the more time passed, the more she lodged herself in his thoughts. Not just her dramatic arrival or her bizarre mating ultimatum, but her presence, her discipline, the way she moved like a wind-honed blade, deliberate and precise. She wasn't trying to win him, she wasn't chasing anything. She just lived by rules older than his species, presence in the quadrant, and she expected him to learn them if he wanted to survive. That kind of certainty wasn't arrogance, it was earned. The next morning he returned to the gardens without needing to ask. The old beastwoman gave him a grunt of acknowledgement and handed him a heavier tool this time. He didn't mind. Labor made his thoughts quiet. For a few hours, he didn't have to figure out how to repair his shuttle, navigate unfamiliar customs, or think about how Alma's stare still lingered even when she wasn't around. Later, after midday, he wandered toward the edge platforms where younger beast folk trained. He didn't interrupt, just watched from a respectful distance. The aerial sparring was unlike anything he'd seen, a blend of grappling, sudden divvies, and wind-assisted flips. Some used wooden batons or wing blades, others nothing but their claws. He found himself analyzing their timing, trying to understand how someone with wings balanced momentum with strategy. His fingers twitched unconsciously, drawing invisible lines through the air as if charting flight paths, trying to steal techniques. Alma's voice came from behind him, dry and low. Eric didn't jump, trying to understand them. "There's a difference." She moved to stand beside him. "You read movement well, not like most groundborn." "I've had to learn fast," he replied, not looking at her. "People don't always tell you what they plan, but their body does." Alma tilted her head, her scar catching the sun. "Your body does not lie either. It says you are no soldier, but you think like one." "I'm trained in diplomacy," he said, finally glancing at her, "but I had to do field rescue work before that. Things go wrong in space. When they do, you adapt." She studied him in silence. He didn't feel judged, just measured. "You said yesterday that no one was coming," Eric said, voice quiet. "You're probably right. Even if the emergency beacon lit up, the signal was weak. This far into neutral space, response time could take weeks. You think to stay until then? I don't see another option." She nodded once. "Then you must learn sky rights, not just food and trade, all of it." Eric folded his arms. "Why help me now?" "Because you still try," she answered. "Most soft-skinned males beg, bribe, or break. You learn, you plant, you listen. That means you are worth shaping." He raised an eyebrow, shaping into what? She didn't answer. Instead, she walked ahead and gestured for him to follow. She led him to a different part of the village, one where platforms narrowed and slanted, less communal and more private. Small nests made of twisted roots and woven fabric lined the branches, and beneath one of them, a carved totem stood. She stopped in front of it and placed a hand on the wood. "My father," she said, "wing elder before me. He believed groundborns could never understand the sky, that they'd always look up, not across. I challenged him, took a mate from off-world, he betrayed us, sold entry codes to raiders. My father was slain, my clan scattered. I broke his bones myself and burned my mate's name from our stories." Eric said nothing. He let the silence settle. Alma turned to him slowly. "I do not tell this to gain pity. I tell it because now you walk here, in the ashes of that betrayal. And I must know, are you a man who bends when the wind blows or flies with it?" He met her eyes. "I don't fly, Alma, but I know how to climb." She stared at him for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod, approval, maybe curiosity, maybe something else that didn't have a word in either of their languages. From that day forward, she trained him. It wasn't formal instruction. There were no lectures, no sparring matches with rules. Instead, she dragged him along skywalks barely wide enough for 1 foot at a time, made him cross swaying rope bridges in howling wind without a harness, and forced him to memorize wind patterns based on feather drift. She threw him feathers and told him what direction the wind would carry him if he jumped. She timed him as he climbed vine pillars, using only his hands and a broken stick for leverage. When he failed, she didn't scold. She simply waited, arms crossed, until he stood up again and tried without whining. By the third evening, his hands were blistered, his back sore, and his appetite had grown sharp again. But instead of asking for food, he returned to the gardens, worked another 2 hours in silence. The old beastwoman wordlessly handed him a plate, twice the portion of the last, and this time it came with a faint smile. That night, Alma didn't show up at his hut, but her presence lingered in the small things. A feather left on the ledge, a claw mark on a vine to indicate safer footing, the faint scent of her fur still clinging to the windswept cloth left behind his shade. Eric didn't know what he was becoming in this village, but he knew what he wasn't: weak, broken, or dependent. He was learning, he was adapting, and Alma, whatever she was, whatever she wanted, was watching it all unfold. Eric woke up to the wind howling across the canopy like a living thing. The thin, woven panels of his hut rattled softly, and a low vibration hummed through the support vines that tethered the structure to the nearest sky root. The clouds below had shifted color, no longer soft pink but laced with streaks of orange and storm gray, a sure sign the morning thermals would be stronger, more dangerous. He rolled to his feet, checking the bindings on his boots, already knowing Alma would be waiting for him before the first bell of the sun sounded across the village. She never gave warning. She simply showed up and expected him to keep pace. She stood at the training perch when he arrived, arms crossed, wings drawn tightly against her back, her tail resting on the platform edge. There was a glint in her eyes that morning, something sharper than usual, as if she'd been waiting for this day. Without a word, she tossed him a curved stick. "Blunt combat today," she said. "Defense only. Don't try to win, try to survive." Eric caught the stick one-handed and gave a slow nod. "I'm starting to think you enjoy this." Alma didn't smile, but her voice carried a flicker of amusement. "Only when you bleed and still ask questions." The sparring began fast. Alma didn't hold back. Her strikes were fierce, driven by her hips and shoulders, not just brute strength. Eric barely had time to think, just react. He moved instinctively, dodging low, parrying hard, stepping into hits that would have flattened him a week ago. Each blow stung his arms and ribs, but he didn't stumble. He'd learned how to flow with the hits, how to keep his footing even on unstable platforms. The fight stretched longer than usual, neither of them speaking. Each movement a silent conversation of willpower and reflex. Then suddenly she stopped, stepped back, her stick lowered. "You fight like a man who wants to earn something," she said, "but not me." Eric's breathing was heavy. "You're the one who said this wasn't a mating." "I didn't say I didn't want you," she replied bluntly. "I said not yet." He paused. "Then what is this?" "Approving. Not for me, for the tribe. They see how you rise, how you endure. You bleed in front of them, they remember it. You eat at my side without falling, they begin to trust." He straightened. "So all of this was politics." "No, politics has words," she said. "This is survival." Eric let the stick fall to the ground. "Then tell me what happens next. What do I need to do to stop being a ground-born and start being someone who belongs?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out over the cloud line where another platform hovered just out of sight, tethered only by a single vine. It swayed more aggressively than the others, far from the village core. "There is a trial," she said at last. "It's old, forgotten by most, but I remember." "What kind of trial?" "You climb the tether. No wings, no safety vine, no wind bracers. You reach the outpost. Retrieve the storm horn left there by my father. Bring it back before dusk." Eric stared at the hanging vine, then back at her. "That's a 50-meter climb, straight drop beneath." She turned her gaze back to him. You want to be kin to this place?" Then proved sky does not scare you. He looked at her for a long time, his jaw tight. Then he picked up the stick again, rested it over his shoulders, and started walking toward the edge platform. "I'll get your storm horn," he said. "No," she corrected. "Your storm horn, if you bring it back, it belongs to you." The climb was worse than he expected, not because of height. He'd worked starship hulls in zero-G replaced panels on spinning outer rings, but because of the wind. It pushed from odd angles, sometimes steady, sometimes sudden. The vine twisted with each gust, making the entire world feel like a pendulum. Every grip had to be sure, every foothold planned. A single slip would mean falling into an endless ocean of air and cloud. Halfway up, he paused to catch his breath, arms shaking. The storm horn must have been left there for a reason, a test, a trap, or just a relic no one dared recover until someone foolish enough came along. He didn't have wings. He didn't have power. What he had was grit and hunger, not just for food anymore, but for something harder to name. By the time he reached the top, the wind was howling. The outpost was barely big enough to stand on, made from old root-woven rope and reinforced bark. The horn was there, curved, dark metal polished by years of exposure, tied with ceremonial feathers that flapped wildly. He wrapped both arms around it, tied it to his back, and began the descent. Every inch down was war. His arms ached, his legs trembled, his breath came shallow. But when the final leap brought him to the platform, his boots hit wood solidly and he fell to one knee, horn intact. The gathered villagers were silent. Even the younger ones, who had mocked his early stumbles, stared with wide eyes. Alma stepped forward. She reached down, pulled him up without a word, and held the horn high. A cry went up sharp and brief, not a cheer, but an acknowledgement, a right fulfilled. Eric met her gaze. "Is this the part where I get fed again?" She smirked. "Tonight, you eat first." And for the first time since he arrived, he was seated at the circle center, directly across from Alma, not as a guest, not as a challenge, but as her equal. The food was warm, plentiful, and no longer off-limits. As he reached for a piece of roasted serpent meat, Alma placed a hand on his wrist, just long enough to make the others pause. She leaned in close. "I won't ask again." He didn't move. "Ask what?" "To be your mate." Eric looked at her, wind-tossed feathers in her ears, golden eyes steady, and replied quietly, "Good, because I'm not saying no." The days following the trial were different. Eric could feel it in every glance, every nod, every shift of posture from the villagers. They no longer looked at him like a guest or a burden. Now, even the young warriors paused their sky sparring to greet him as he passed, and the older ones spoke to him without testing tones or condescension. The horn he retrieved was mounted beside the central platform, tied with fresh feathers and bloodroot vines in a silent declaration. One of the ground-born had risen, and Alma, she didn't say it, but something in her had changed too. She didn't hover over him like a commander anymore. She didn't watch his footing like she expected failure. Instead, she flew beside him, walked beside him, and more than once, she let silence settle between them without tension, just quiet understanding. He appreciated that. She wasn't trying to own him now. She'd seen what he was made of, and he'd earned the right to walk his own pace. They spent more time together, not under orders, not bound by some trial or chore, but by a strange, slow comfort that neither of them talked about directly. They walked the high canopy at dusk, watching wind serpents dive through the clouds like living ribbons. She showed him how to read the flick of feathers in the air currents. He showed her how to take apart and reassemble his damaged shuttle transmitter with improvised tools. She laughed when he sliced his thumb open with a crystal sliver, and he laughed when she tried to mimic his accent and butchered half his language. It wasn't a courtship. It wasn't a treaty. It was something in between. That made it more dangerous. The turning point came at nightfall, 3 days after the horn trial. Eric had been expected to sit beside Alma for the evening feast. She arrived late, wings dusted with golden pollen from the upper glades, and sat close enough that their arms touched. No one questioned it. No one teased. A silence fell over the table as she leaned in, resting her chin on her hand as she looked at him. "I dreamed of the sky breaking," she said. Eric chewed a piece of vine root slowly. "I don't know what that is." "When the clouds split in fire and the old trees fell," she said, voice low. "A tale from before my mother's time. The tribe says it's a warning. When wingless ones fall from the sky, they bring the second breaking." Eric didn't look away. "You think I'm here to break your world?" "I think fate sends warnings before it sends storms." Her eyes scanned him, unreadable, "and I think sometimes warnings look like men who don't know when to run." He said his bowl down. If you want me gone, say so. I don't, she said quietly, but that doesn't mean you're safe. That night he dreamed of falling. The next day the first storm hit, not just wind and rain, but a sky-first surge, lightning tearing horizontally across the cloud line. One of the outer platforms broke loose from its vines and swung dangerously, nearly colliding with a mid-tier nesting hall. Alma was already airborne by the time Eric reached the edge. She shouted something down to him, sharp and fast, and he sprinted for the tether lines without thinking. Together they worked like clockwork. She cut the failing vines with her wing blades, and he reinforced the anchor with salvaged shuttle cord, looping the makeshift harness around his chest and hauling the platform into position inch by inch. Wind roared around them. Rain hammered down, but they moved together. No yelling, no hesitation, just trust and timing. Afterwards, soaked in bruise, they collapsed in her nesting hall. It was the first time he'd been inside. It wasn't as primal as he expected. Layers of feathered cloth, trinkets, curved furniture made of bark strips and sun-woven grass. Warm, personal. She leaned back against a bundle of soft vine pillows. Her wings spread wide behind her to dry and watched him peel off his soaked outer shirt. "You didn't panic," she said. He rubbed his neck. "Not my first time holding something together by the skin of my teeth." "You fight storms the way I fight battle," she murmured, "but your body is not made for it." "No," he agreed, breath still catching, "but maybe my heart is." She stared at him then for a long time, and for once no challenge sat behind her gaze, just a question. "You want this?" she asked. Eric didn't hesitate. "I want you, not just the food or the survival. You, wings, claws, stubborn pride and all." She moved slowly, like a huntress not entirely convinced the prey wouldn't bolt. But when she reached him, her hands on his jaw, her wings folding slowly around them both, it felt less like surrender and more like claiming something both of them had earned. Their kiss wasn't gentle. It was heat, wind, and hunger. It was all the unsaid truths between them. He didn't flinch when her claws scraped his back. She didn't pull away when he gripped her tightly, unafraid of her strength. The world didn't disappear, but for the first time since he crashed here, it made sense. Later, wrapped together beneath thick woven sheets, he spoke without looking up. "Still think I'm the warning." She chuckled, tail curling around his leg. "No, you're the storm." And for the first time in days, he slept without dreaming of falling. The following morning, the village felt different, not in how it looked or sounded, but in the weight of how others moved around him. Eric noticed the subtle shift in posture from the warriors who once ignored him, how they inclined their heads instead of just passing by. He saw it in the elders who offered him food without needing to be asked, and most of all, he felt it in Alma's presence when she walked beside him through the platform walkways, without flinching at how close their arms brushed or how the other villagers stared. No one said the word mated, but no one needed to. The air said it for them. So did the look in Alma's eyes when they locked onto his during council briefings, or when they traded small murmurs under the canopy, as if they were always meant to exist in the same space. But peace didn't last. It never did. Trouble arrived in the form of sky trackers, roving winged messengers who patrolled the outer reaches of the cloud boundary. They returned breathless and bloodied, their wings frayed by wind shear and claw marks. Alma stood still as stone while they delivered the report. Eric listened from the edge jaw tight as the truth unfolded. A rival tribe had moved closer, one that didn't recognize Alma's authority or the sanctuary her clan had built above the high roots. And worse, they weren't just migrating, they were hunting. "They test borders," the messenger explained, "not for prey for him." The circle of attention turned toward Eric like a blade being unsheathed. Alma didn't waver. "He's under my wing, let them test it and see if they bleed." Eric didn't speak until the crowd dispersed, but once alone with Alma on one of the high platforms overlooking the storm-broken sky, he faced her directly. "So this is about me," he said. "I didn't realize I'd brought trouble with me." "You didn't," she replied, her voice firm. They think you are valuable. They want what I have. And what do you have exactly? You, she said without flinching, Eric's mouth open, then closed. He stepped closer, resting both hands on the railing beside her. If they come here, they'll bring weapons. I can help. You are not trained for our ways, she said. I'm trained to adapt. I've worked conflict zones. I know how to build defenses. Let me prove I can pull my weight again. She studied him, the wind teasing her feathers, the scar down her cheek catching the light. Finally, she gave a slight nod. Then come, we prepare. Over the next 2 days, Eric worked alongside the villagers to strengthen their defenses, not just walls or sky nets, but positioning. He mapped potential landing zones on the outer platforms, helped engineer rope drop barriers using parts scavenged from his wrecked shuttle, and coordinated lookout shifts with the younger scouts. He wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the fastest, but he was precise, methodical, and relentless. And most importantly, he listened. He took advice from the warriors, followed instructions from the craftsmen, and never assumed he knew better. That earned respect far quicker than shouting orders ever could. Alma watched him often, but didn't interfere. She only stepped in when tensions between the warriors ran high, when pride flared and discipline frayed. Her word was still law, and she wielded it like a blade, sharp, quick, and final. On the evening before the expected confrontation, Eric found her sitting at the edge of her nesting hall, one leg dangling over the side, wings loose and half-folded in thought. He joined her without a word, passing her a strip of dried fruit from his belt pouch. She accepted it, biting off a piece with a thoughtful frown. "You don't have to stay on this platform," she said. "You could take the glider wing down to the lower fog shelf. If you vanish, they may not chase." "I didn't climb up here just to run back down when things get hard," Eric said. "Besides, you think I could sleep knowing I left you behind to deal with it alone? You would not be the first." "But I'm not the first, am I?" he asked. "I'm the only one who stayed." Her eyes lifted to his. "You are." They sat in silence after that, and even though the storm clouds gathered again, even though the wind howled louder that night than it had all week, neither of them flinched. When morning came, so did the enemy. The raiding party didn't announce themselves. They dove from above, using the sunlight to blind the scouts. Winged warriors painted in black and red landed hard on the outermost platform, sending villagers scattering. Alma was already in the air, her blade wings slicing open the lead attacker's spear shaft mid-lunge. Eric didn't wait. He ran to the secondary platform, where he'd hidden improvised spike lines and traps beneath loose netting. As expected, 3 attackers landed there, only to find themselves entangled, limbs caught in sharp hooks and flailing against the ropes. He didn't have a weapon, so he grabbed a wooden pole and swung hard, catching one in the side of the knee. The beastwoman howled and went down, writhing. Another lunged at him, but before her claws could reach him, Alma struck from above, wings snapping wide, talons digging into the enemy's shoulders as she drove them both off the platform. Eric lunged to the edge, heart hammering, but she rose again seconds later, blood spattered on her arm, breathing hard but unhurt. The skirmish didn't last long. The village was ready. The raiders hadn't expected resistance so coordinated. When the final attacker fell, snarling and pinned by a net, Alma stood at the center of the chaos, her wings spread wide, her chest rising with every breath, and her gaze locked directly on Eric. He approached her, bruised, cut, and winded. "Still think I should have taken the glider?" he asked. She didn't answer. She stepped forward and kissed him, right there in front of the tribe, in front of the sky. No one questioned it. They didn't speak of the kiss afterward, not because it meant nothing. If anything, it meant everything. But because some moments weren't made for words, that one, shared in the aftermath of blood and wind, didn't belong to logic or explanation. It belonged to survival and instinct, to the feeling that they were no longer just partners by circumstance, but tethered by something much deeper. In the days that followed, the village returned to routine, though something in the air had shifted. Warriors that once eyed Eric with suspicion now nodded to him with the quiet respect reserved for comrades. The children began to mimic his movements in play, pretending to fight off invisible enemies with sticks and dramatic war cries, and at mealtimes, no one batted an eye when Alma handed him the first bowl, but for all the calm on the surface, Alma grew distant. Not cold, but heavier. She trained harder, slept less, and took to the high winds alone in the early mornings, wings slicing through the air, like she was trying to outfly something unseen. Eric noticed the change immediately. He didn't press her. He'd learned by now that trust wasn't about pushing. It was about being there when the armor cracked. It cracked 4 days later. He found her sitting atop the old stormhorn post, staring into the horizon as the sun broke through layers of amber clouds. Her wings were tucked tight, but her shoulders were tense, her posture too still. He climbed up beside her, settling without invitation, and waited. "They'll come again," she said finally, eyes fixed on the farthest drifting clouds. Stronger next time. The first raid was only teeth-baring, a warning. Eric folded his hands over his knees. "Then we'll be ready again." She gave a bitter half-laugh. "You still think like a soldier. Ready is an illusion. Every fight costs something, and I've run out of things I can afford to lose." "You didn't lose anyone in the last raid." "That's not what I meant." He looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't just carrying strategy on her shoulders. She was carrying guilt. The scar on her cheek wasn't the only thing she'd kept from the last betrayal. She was waiting for the next one, bracing for it. And no matter how much ground they'd covered together, part of her still thought he might be the one to bring it. "You think I'll leave?" he said quietly. "I think you're not bound to this sky," she answered. "Your crew may still come. A signal might reach them. What happens then? You'll be asked to return, will you?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know I won't leave without you." She turned to him sharply, eyes wide. "You'd give up your world." "I already did," he said, "the moment I stayed after the first trial, after the horn, after the fight. Every decision since has been me choosing this place, choosing you." She stared, and for a moment her expression softened. The wind tugged gently at her feathers, the stormhorn below them silent and still. "You talk like a mate," she said, quieter now. Eric smiled faintly. "Maybe I finally understand what that means." They sat there together as the morning brightened, not needing anything more than the space between them to speak what neither could say aloud. But the calm didn't last. By midday, the sky trackers returned, this time not with news of an approaching threat, but a message. A challenge. The rival clan had sent an emissary not for negotiation, but for spectacle. They'd requested a parley on neutral ground, a floating bone platform halfway between the territories, known to both tribes as a sacred meeting space. The invitation wasn't an olive branch, it was a baited hook. Alma read the carved skybone message twice before she spoke. "They want me to come alone. Bring no warriors, no mate." Eric read the tension in her jaw. "You're not going." "If I don't, they claim fear, weakness. It invites attack." "It is an attack, just a slower one." She paced the platform, tail flicking. "If I go, I risk death. If I don't, I risk war. Either way, they want blood." "Then don't give it to them," Eric said. "Let me go in your place." She stopped cold. "They asked for me." "You said it yourself. They want leverage. They won't kill an outsider, not if they think they can use him. Let me see what they're really after." She moved to him, grabbed his shoulders, eyes burning. "You're not a shield. I won't use you like one." "You're not using me," he said. "We're mated, remember? That means I don't stand behind you. I stand with you. This is my fight now too, Alma. Let me do my part." For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. "Then we go together, but only us. No guards." Eric met her gaze, agreed. That night preparations were made. Quietly, discreetly, Alma wore her war leathers, wings polished, claws sharpened. Eric carried no weapons, just the ceremonial horn across his back, a symbol of the honor he'd earned. At dawn, they left the village together, flying through the breaking light toward the bone platform where the fate of everything they'd built would be decided. Neither of them said goodbye, not because they didn't want to, but because neither planned to lose. The bone platform looked like something built for gods to bleed on. It hovered on ancient currents, lashed together with spine wood and clawbone, its surface bleached by wind and time. Runes etched in both dialects covered the center, a symbolic circle meant to honor parley, not battle. But Eric could feel the tension the moment his boots touched the surface. There was no peace here, just the weight of old grudges held tight by ceremony. Alma landed beside him in silence, her wings folding sharply, her shoulders square. She didn't need to speak. Her body said everything. Stay close. Stay sharp. Watch their eyes. The opposing party arrived seconds later, sweeping in with cold grace. Their leader was a broad-chested male with broken wing feathers and a necklace of sharpened bone. His fur was darker than Alma, almost rust red, and his golden eyes flicked from her to Eric with something between disgust and curiosity. Behind him, 2 guards stood at attention, armed despite the terms. Eric whispered, "You seeing the blades on those 2? Alma replied, without turning her head, "I see them. Let them draw first." The rival leader stepped forward and spoke with slow precision. "Alma of the Broken Feather, you come without army as asked, brave or foolish." "I come with my mate," she answered, voice like steel. "Not for your approval, for your answer." The leader's eyes slid back to Eric. "The ground-born, we heard rumors that you let one into your nest, that he eats at your side, shares your wing." Eric didn't flinch. "She did let me do anything. I earn my place." A ripple of amusement crossed the guards' faces, but the leader didn't smile. "And what has he earned, Alma? What has he offered? Your mate is no warbird. He has no wings." "He has spine," she said, "and the courage to stand where others ran." The leader stepped closer, circling slightly. "You risk your tribe for one male, one outsider, you weaken yourself." Eric stepped in without hesitation. "She didn't come here to be measured. Say what you came to say." The leader turned his full attention on Eric now, expression unreadable. "Then listen, groundborn, we do not want your blood. We want your knowledge. The sky speaks of signals and strange machines. We want the same. Give us the remnants of your crash, the parts, the power cells. In return, we let your tribe keep their skis." Eric didn't even glance at Alma. "That tech's dead. You strip it, you get static." The leader's smile was thin. "You lie? We saw the flare beacon still active. You called to your kind." Alma's wing twitched once. She hadn't known about the beacon. Eric stayed steady. "The beacon is passive. Even if it transmits, it won't bring anyone in time to matter. You're chasing a shadow." "Then you won't miss it," the leader replied. "Give it, or we return in numbers next time. Your platform will crack before the sun reaches zenith." Alma stepped forward, threats on sacred ground. "We only speak truth," he said, tilting his head low, "unless you prefer blood over barter." Eric took a slow breath. "I have a counter-offer." "That got the leader's attention, you." "I'll dismantle the beacon myself," Eric said. "Destroy it. You'll have nothing to chase. You want war, it'll be on you. No prize, no spoils, just loss." The leader narrowed his eyes. "Why would you give it up?" "Because I'm not here to call home," Eric said. "I already found it." Alma turned her head slightly, just enough to look at him. That was the only movement she made. The leader considered, then laughed softly. "You love her, then? Enough to cut your own tether?" Eric nodded once. "More than enough." For a moment, it looked like the leader might accept the deal. Then one of the guards made a move too fast, too practiced, a blade drawn from beneath the cloak, not toward Eric, but toward Alma. A faint distraction. Eric moved without thinking. He stepped between them, catching the glint of metal just in time. The blade slashed across his shoulder, not deep, but enough to spin him sideways. Alma lunged before the second strike could land, her claws catching the attacker's arm and dragging him down with a bone-snapping crash. The other guard drew, but Eric kicked the blade from his hand with precision. The weapon tumbled off the platform into the clouds. The rival leader held up both hands, stepping back. "This is not my doing." Alma snarled. "You brought weapons to sacred ground. You brought betrayal." Eric, blood soaking through his sleeve, held himself upright. "Then this deal's done." She advanced on the leader, wings flaring. "You come near my sky again. I won't parley. I won't negotiate. I'll drop your bones into the storm myself." The leader held her gaze, then nodded once, understood. They flew away not long after, silent and swift, leaving behind the broken ruins of the old platform and 2 bleeding bodies, one of them still breathing barely. Eric sat down slowly, shoulder pulsing. Alma crouched beside him, pressing cloth to the wound. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Didn't think about it," he replied, just moved. She looked at him for a long time. You're bleeding." "Yeah, I noticed." But she smiled, and it wasn't out of amusement. It was something softer. "You're stupid," she said. "I get that a lot." She leaned in, her forehead touching his. "But your mind," and he smiled back. "That's the plan." The wound on Eric's shoulder wasn't life-threatening, but Alma treated it like it was. She didn't hand him off to a healer. She didn't bark orders and leave. She sat with him through the entire flight back, blood drying against her arm where she'd braced him mid-air, her wings shielding him from wind gusts, her face as still as stone. When they landed, she said nothing, not to the villagers that gathered in alarm, not to the elders who demanded an account. She simply carried him back to her nest, laid him down with infuriating gentleness, and knelt beside him with her jaw tight and her claws twitching. "I'm fine," he muttered, wincing slightly as she inspected the bandage. "You are not," she snapped. "You are bleeding. You still are." "I've had worse," he said, offering a weak grin. "Besides, that guard's wrist won't be working for a while." "This isn't a joke," she hissed, leaning in. "They tried to kill you, Eric, on sacred ground. That wasn't politics. That was a message. They want to break me, and they'll do it through you." He sat up slowly, ignoring the flare of pain in his ribs. "Then we hit back, not with blades, with something they can't counter. We prepare, we unify, we don't let them isolate us or catch us off guard." Alma's eyes locked on his, golden and sharp. "You speak like a leader. I'm your mate. That's supposed to mean something, right?" "It means everything," she said quietly, and for a while, that silence was enough. But nothing stayed quiet long in the sky. The next 3 days were a storm of preparation. Scouts expanded their flight paths. Weapon masters worked around the clock, reforging broken gear and reinforcing sky nets. The glider towers were restored with scavenged parts from Eric's down shuttle. Eric worked despite the shoulder pain-checking equipment, training younger villagers in hand-to-hand tactics, mapping out wind patterns for tactical advantage. He didn't act like a hero. He didn't bark orders. He worked. And because of that, people followed him. Alma remained the spear tip, still commanding, still fierce. But there was a difference in how the villagers looked at her now, not just as their protector, but as part of something new, something stronger, a bond that had survived betrayal, storm, and blood. It was during one of these long planning sessions, deep into dusk, when the signal came. A flare burst in the far sky, trailing violet smoke. The trackers returned minutes later, breathless. "They're massing," one said. "Not raiding, marching. They bring ropes, spikes, chains they want to claim our platforms. Occupy them." Alma stood without hesitation. "Then they will find only bones beneath their claws." Eric rose beside her. "Let me fly with you." She turned sharply. "You're still recovering." "I've recovered," he said, steady. "I may not have wings, but I've got a spine, and I'm not watching this from the sidelines." She stared at him, something unreadable in her gaze. Then she nodded. Once. Then, "You fly beside me one last time." The battle came at dawn, not the chaotic skirmish of the last raid, but a full strike. Dozens of winged warriors in formation, flanking their leader, blades drawn, ropes ready. The rival tribe descended from the high clouds like thunder, expecting fear, expecting disorder. They didn't find it. The villagers were waiting, not scattered, but positioned. Skynets caught the first wave, dragging attackers into spiraling divvies. Wind blades hidden in the pillars of the walkways lashed out as the enemy landed. Eric, armed with a reinforced spear and one of Alma's spare bracers, moved through the lower levels, directing civilians, calling out platform shifts as the storm winds changed. He never stopped moving. Alma fought above. She moved like fire incarnate, wings slicing, claws raking, her voice cutting through the storm louder than any war cry. She was untouchable, a blur of golden fury, and every attacker who reached her regretted it. But even fury tires. By mid-battle, Eric found himself face-to-face with a rival leader again. This time on a platform cracked at the edge, half its netting torn. "You should have left when you had the chance," the man snarled. Eric's arm was numb, his clothes soaked in sweat and blood. He didn't blink. "You should have picked a better enemy." The leader lunged, and Eric sidestepped, letting the man's momentum carry him into a braced support pole. Eric struck low, driving the butt of his spear into the man's side. Not a killing blow, but enough to drop him. Above, Alma landed hard, wings beating the air. She looked down at the groaning form of the leader. "Yield!" she demanded. He spat blood. "This isn't over." "Yes," she said coldly. "It is." She hauled him to the edge, held him for a breathless second, then threw him off. He didn't fall far. A net caught him below, wrapped and tangled, but the message was clear. The battle ended not in cheers, but in silence, a silence of shock, of survival. Eric stood with Alma on the central platform as the sun finally broke through. "We won," he said, half in disbelief. "No," she replied, "we endured that stronger." And beside her, bruised and bloody and aching, he smiled. The cleanup took 2 days, not because of bodies. There were fewer than they expected, and most of the wounded had been treated within hours, but because the weight of the moment lingered. The enemy tribe, beaten and disarmed, had been escorted to the border platforms and given a warning sharp enough to be remembered for generations. Alma stood at the center of it all, not crowing victory or demanding praise, but commanding respect simply by existing. She didn't need to tell anyone what had happened. The sky spoke for her, so did the broken weapons lashed to the perimeter posts, and the way the wind no longer carried the scent of fear. Eric didn't seek attention either. He stayed busy helping reinforce supports, rebind damaged glider towers, and assist the injured. His shoulder ached constantly now. He'd torn something again during the final clash, but he wore the pain like a second skin, a reminder of where he stood, and more importantly, who he stood beside. Alma found him the morning after the last repairs were finished, sitting at the edge of her nest platform, legs dangling over the clouds. She said nothing at first, just walked up behind him, wings rustling in the wind. "You should be resting," she said. "So should you," he replied, not turning around. She sat beside him close enough that their arms touched. "The village speaks of you now, not as guest, not as groundborn. They call you Stormhand. It means one who turns chaos into strength." He chuckled softly. "That sounds way cooler than diplomat with a bruised shoulder." She didn't laugh. She was staring at him with something unreadable in her expression. Then she reached into the satchel on her hip and pulled out a small strip of bark etched with carvings. "I made this before the fight," she said. "Didn't know if I'd live to give it." Eric took the offering, turning it over. It wasn't fancy, just a series of etched lines curved in a spiral pattern with 2 wing marks intertwined at the center. But even without knowing the exact ritual he understood, it was more than a trinket. It was a symbol, a bonding token. he guessed. She nodded. You've earned it. You've bled with us, fought beside me, chosen this life without being forced. No more trials, no more tests. If you wear this, you are mine, fully. No more pretending. He held the token in his hand and looked at her, not just the fierce warrior who had once blocked his food and stared him down like he was prey, but the woman who had risked everything to protect her people, and who had allowed herself to trust him even when it terrified her. The same woman who had shared her nest with him, not out of tradition, but because she wanted him there when the world was quiet. I never pretended, he said. From the moment I stayed, I knew where I wanted to be. He slid the token over his shoulder strap, tying it beside the carved horned shard he wore from the day he'd survived his first trial. Alma leaned in and kissed him, not rushed or passionate this time, but slow and deliberate. It wasn't a claim, it was a promise. When they parted, she exhaled against his cheek and whispered, "You eat first tonight." Eric smiled. As long as you're not sitting on the food again. That night, the entire village gathered under the high canopy for a rare celebration. Fires glowed and spirals across the branches. Music played on hollow-shelled drums and whistling reeds. Warriors danced in the air, spiraling around the torchlight with wings spread wide. And children chased each other along the bridges without fear. Alma stood at the front, wearing her ceremonial blade feathers, and nothing else but the carved bone that marked her as wing guard. Eric stood beside her, shoulder-bandaged hair, wind, tangled, still wearing the same weather-beaten gear he'd crashed in weeks ago, but now woven with sky-colored thread and storm-root beads gifted by the elders. When the food was brought forth, Alma didn't sit down. She stepped aside. Eric stepped forward, picked up the first bowl, and raised it toward the others before taking the first bite. Cheers followed, sharp wing trilling, loud enough to shake the platforms. After the feast, after the music slowed and the firelight turned gold instead of red, Alma pulled him away from the crowd, back to the nest, back to the quiet. They curled up together on the woven bedding, wings and limbs tangled, no awkwardness left, just warmth. "You still miss the stars?" she asked softly. "I see them here," he said, fingers trailing through the feathers behind her ear. "I just didn't know they had names." "And now," he smiled, "now I know one by heart." She kissed him again, murmuring something in her native tongue he didn't need translated. Her wings curled around him, not as shield, not as cage, but as a home. Outside the wind shifted. The village stood strong, no more raiders, no more doubts. And in the nest above the clouds where once a stranger had been denied even a taste of food, a mated pair slept soundly, together, content and at peace, no more ultimatums, no more loneliness, just love.